Picture the exact same $65,000 salary, same digits on the offer letter, one earned in 2016, the other earned in 2026, 10 years apart, down to the exact number. In 2016, that salary covers a modest two-bedroom apartment with $1,400 left over every month. A real vacation once a year, a steady 401k contribution. It feels like a comfortable middle-class life. In 2026, that same $65,000 barely covers rent. Maybe $200 is left over. The 401k contribution shrinks or stops, not because the person got lazier or less disciplined, because there's dramatically less room left to breathe. Same number, same effort, a completely different life. And the thing that did this never sent a bill with its name on it. It never showed up as a line item on a pay stub. No vote. No new law, just a grocery total that's a little higher than last month, over and over, for 10 years straight. This is inflation, but not the way you usually hear about it, a number on the news that goes up or down. This is inflation as what it actually is for a middle-class household, an invisible, regressive tax, one with no bracket, no April deadline, and in 2026, it's quietly draining more middle-class wealth than almost any policy decision you'll ever vote on. Here's the part nobody explains. Inflation isn't evenly distributed pain, it's a transfer, away from people holding cash and fixed paychecks, toward people holding assets, real estate, stocks, businesses that inflate right alongside prices. If you own a home, its value tends to rise with inflation. If you own stocks, company revenue rises with inflation too. But if your wealth is mostly a paycheck and a savings account, inflation attacks you from every direction while asset owners are protected and sometimes actually profit, because inflation also shrinks the real burden of any debt they're carrying. That's why economists call it a regressive tax, not because it hits low earners hardest in the traditional sense, because it specifically punishes the exact position most middle-class households sit in: income-dependent, moderately liquid, asset-light, with zero pricing power to pass rising costs onto someone else. Let me show you exactly where this tax is extracted from your life, whether or not you've ever noticed it happening. Number 1, the raise that isn't a raise. A 3% raise in a year when inflation runs 5% is a real pay cut wearing a costume. It feels like progress because the number went up. It's actually regression because everything you need to buy went up faster. Over a decade of raises that quietly lag inflation, real purchasing power can fall 15 to 20%, even as your salary climbs every single year on paper. Number 2, your savings account is losing money right now. $20,000 sitting in a savings account earning 0.5% interest during a year of 4% inflation loses about 3.5% of its real value annually. The balance never drops. The bank statement looks fine. But what that money can actually buy is shrinking every single month, silently, with no alert, no notification, nothing. Number 3. The emergency fund treadmill. 3 to 6 months of expenses sounds like a fixed target. It isn't. As prices rise, that target keeps climbing. A fund that felt adequate 5 years ago may now cover meaningfully less time, even though you never touched it, simply because everything it's supposed to cover got more expensive around it. Number 4, rent outpacing income in real time. In many cities, rent has grown faster than median wages for years. A household spending 20% of income on rent a decade ago can easily be spending 25% today on the same apartment, adjusted for market rent growth, without a single dramatic increase that ever felt like the moment things got hard. It's just gradual enough to be invisible until you actually compare the two timelines side by side. Number 5, shrinkflation. Same price, smaller box. An 18-ounce cereal box shrinks to 15 ounces, while the sticker price stays at $4.99. That's a real 20% price increase per ounce that never shows up on the shelf tag, quietly hitting name-brand grocery shoppers hardest. Number 6, debt helps asset owners and hurts everyone else. A fixed-rate mortgage on an appreciating home benefits twice from inflation. The home's value likely rises, and the real burden of the fixed payment shrinks. A renter with no fixed-rate debt against an appreciating asset gets none of that benefit, only the cost side of rising prices. Here's the myth that keeps all of this invisible. If your salary keeps going up, you assume you're making progress. But a rising number only means something once you compare it against inflation for that same year. Nobody runs that comparison. The pay stub only ever shows the nominal number, never the real one. The entire erosion happens completely outside the one document most people actually check. Second myth, keeping money in a savings account is the safe choice. Safe from market volatility? Yes. Safe from inflation? No. Those are two entirely different claims, and cash only satisfies the first one. Third myth, this affects everyone equally. It doesn't. It hits cash holders and renters hardest, while asset owners with fixed-rate debt are largely protected, sometimes even benefiting. It's a distinctly middle-class vulnerability, hitting the exact households with enough to hold savings, but not enough to hold the diversified assets that shield the wealthy from the same erosion. So here's what actually helps. On cash, keep 3 to 6 months for real emergencies, but move any real excess into a high-yield account instead of a standard savings account earning next to nothing. Recalculate that target every year since it moves. On debt, don't rush to prepay a low, fixed-rate mortgage during high inflation. That fixed rate becomes relatively cheaper every year prices rise. Prioritize eliminating variable rate debt instead, since it moves against you the same way inflation does. On investments, holding the bulk of your long-term savings in cash instead of a diversified portfolio means choosing guaranteed erosion over historically better long-term protection. Stocks aren't a guarantee, and any single year can be rough, but over decades, broad ownership has been one of the more reliable inflation hedges available to ordinary households. On income, benchmark every raise against that year's actual inflation rate, not against your own prior salary. A 3% raise in a 2% inflation year is real progress. The identical 3% raise in a 5% year is real regression. Bring that specific number into your next conversation about pay. Renee did exactly this. A hospital administrator whose salary rose from $58,000 to $71,000 over 8 years. She assumed that was clear career progress. Running the real numbers, she found her actual purchasing power had grown less than 4% over that entire period, because inflation alone had already pushed the equivalent of her old salary to nearly $69,000 before her raises even counted. Almost everything that felt like advancement was just the tax being repaid. She didn't find a secret investment or a clever trick. She just started measuring a force that had been operating on her paycheck the entire time, unnamed and unmeasured. And the moment she measured it, it became something she could actually manage instead of something that just happened to her, quietly, year after year. Go back to those two people earning the identical $65,000, 10 years apart, same digits, same effort, but one of them was living inside a version of that number that stretched meaningfully further, while the other had been quietly taxed down to a fraction of it by something that never sent a bill and never once said its own name out loud.